Hi, welcome to my portion of the podcast for the class INST 466. For our group's topic, we chose to look into underrepresentation in media and its relation to tech. So I thought that for today's podcast episode, I would get my good friend from elementary school. We've been friends for a really long time, and I know her enough to know that she has struggled in finding like her true like self-esteem and just like knowing who she is as a person, because there has been a lack of representation in the media that she views and has viewed when she was younger. She used to be a ballet dancer. She's quit now, but for a large portion of her life up until college, she was doing that regularly. So, just we'll get into the podcast episode in a little bit, but just to preface by saying that that's what we'll be talking about. She'll share some of her own personal experiences, but I really wanted to connect this to tech as well, given that the class is oriented around tech and culture. So I did ask her a little bit about tech. A majority of the conversation is about the actual underrepresentation in media and how that has sort of translated for her and how that has affected her in any way. And I feel like this is a really important conversation to have, especially, we're still in our forming years and seeing like social media not be representative of every group for anyone that's hard and it puts like an unrealistic expectation sort of. So yeah, this conversation was really needed. That's all I wanted to say. I just wanted to preface the conversation, but we can get into the podcast episode right now. Thank you. Computer. Okay, I think it's recording. Okay, so we can get started. So just to start, could you introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, my name is Ru. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a sophomore here at UMD studying environmental science and policy.
Great, great. Just for some background, me and Rue have been friends since like
Kindergarten.
pretty much kindergarten for a long time now. And she used to do ballet. And she would talk about how like sometimes she felt like there was like underrepresentation in the ballet industry, specifically when we were younger. So I thought she'd be the perfect person to have on this podcast. So, the first question I have for you is specifically with your passion in ballet, what are some of the most glaring examples of underrepresentation that you've seen in mainstream media?
Yeah, so I have done ballet since I was 3 years old, and just growing up in my own studios, I was usually one of the only people, if not the only person, who had dark skin, so it wasn't the most diverse in that sense. And also, as I grew older, I noticed more in the sense of body types, like ballet, I just started to learn it was a predominantly white art form, and everyone who kind of did it in the past had a certain body type and looked a certain way. And so when I was younger, I maybe didn't notice it as much, but as I got older, I realized that I looked different. And when I would watch professional shows, it definitely was evident that it still is predominantly white. But I think that I've started to see some pockets of diversity, and it's definitely continuing to get better. But yeah, even just watching professional shows, you would kind of see a person of color or two like sticking out in the company. But I think it was good to see that as a young dancer to know that you don't have to look a certain way to do ballet, and it is starting to get better.
Right. Okay, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, but you mentioned like you saw a lot of underrepresentation of certain groups of people like growing up. So how did that like affect you growing up?
Yeah, I remember when I had my first professional audition, I didn't get it, but I remember for that audition, I walked into the room and I was like, first of all, I was like a lot shorter than everyone there. And then I also noticed that it was all there was maybe one black person in the audition and me, and that's like all I noticed in terms of diversity. And I kind of felt like at that time I wasn't super confident in my dancing yet, and then I also kind of felt like I don't look as tall or as skinny, or I don't look similar to all the other people in this audition. And I feel like my confidence wasn't super great there. So I did try my best in the audition, but I was a little bit disappointed afterwards, but it was still a good learning experience. And I think that it's definitely getting more diverse. As I said before, I've started to see an increase in diversity, but at the time I was still kind of young, so um it wasn't too diverse yet.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Can you talk a little bit? It doesn't really have to be just limited to like the ballet aspect of it, but can you talk a little bit about like why representation is important to you?
Yeah, to me personally, I feel like growing up I kind of did activities that were a little bit different. In terms of dance, yes, I feel like I didn't see a lot of South Asian people doing ballet. And then in other stuff, I was on like the school dance team and I did theater. And also I learned Chinese. And that was all just very like, I guess you could say like this might be a little bit stereotypical, but like those were kind of activities that I didn't see a lot of other South Asian people participating in. And so sometimes I kind of felt like, yeah, I don't really know, maybe I'm like a little bit different in that sense. Like I'm not really sure why I don't see a lot of representation in that. And then also growing up in I feel like a big part of representation is the media in terms of like watching TV and movies and stuff growing up. I feel like sometimes there used to be very specific like characters or roles that people of color would play in comparison to other in comparison to maybe like white people. And so then that kind of impacted me in the sense that like I would see them acting a certain way or see like the white people in shows acting a certain way or getting certain things in life. And then I wondered if like it didn't happen for people of color. I feel I'm not really sure if I'm explaining it well, but
No, I get
um
what you're saying.
yeah, just in terms of representation in the media, I feel like it is really helpful to see yourself in the media portrayed in different ways so that you're not like limited to what you know and what you've seen.
Right. And I feel like seeing that from like a young age, like in like your forming years is like very
Yeah.
crucial as well because like you want to like emerge into like your own self and like you're seeing stuff that isn't like truly like representative of what you think. So you touched on this again a little bit earlier. You said that representation in media is increasing a little bit, but I think in my personal opinion, it still falls really short. So do you also agree on this?
I agree with that. I think that there is definitely starting to be more diversity in movies and TV shows with, like casting different actors in different roles and stuff, but like there still tends to be a little bit of stereotyping going on. And then I've noticed kind of in daily life, people will joke about it, but then if like they see like a couple that is a certain race, they'll make a joke about how it's just like a couple from that TV show that's the same race. But which is, I don't know. I guess some people find it funny, but also it's not really the same thing. It's just, it's still so limited that there's just a couple examples you could really pull of diversity in TV.
Right. No, I agree with that. Kind of moving a little bit more into like the tech side, since this is like a class centered around like tech and culture. Um, how do you feel that tech has either increased representation in the arts field, or do you believe that it has hindered it in any way?
I actually think that it has increased it a little bit, but it could still definitely be worked on. I'm thinking in the sense of ballet. Usually we all have to wear tights and a leotard and shoes. And originally, most commonly, you'll see that the tights and shoes are pink, but they were that color because they're supposed to be matching your skin tone. And a long time ago, everyone who was doing ballet had a lighter skin tone. But then, those are still the most commonly found colors. And it was just in the last 10 years that companies started making things with different skin tones, especially darker shades. So it's definitely gotten a little bit more diverse, but they're still not as accessible as just getting pink shoes or pink tights. That's just what's most commonly found. But I think technology has been used in a good way that they were able to make those items available for people. But if they could just continue to do that and also targeting like different body types and in addition to just like the color of the shoes. But it is definitely better because when I was younger, I could never really find shoes that were my color, so I would have to just use foundation that matched my skin tone and like paint my shoes or paint like the straps on my costumes myself. So now that it is available, I think it's definitely good.
And I'm not that like aware of like most like ballet, I guess just like like what's it called? Like gear, I guess. But like are the different colored like shoes and tights and everything, like are they on the same types of like sales channels as like everything else, or do you have to go to like other places to find it?
I feel like usually they might have a couple in store, but typically you would have to buy them online, which makes it a little hard because it's like when you're going to buy makeup at the store, they'll usually have all of the different colors out and you can sample things to try to match it to your skin tone. But when they don't have those in store, it's kind of hard to gauge online what you should be buying.
Right.
So I think that in terms of accessibility could be worked on, but I was surprised to see that actually the price points of like pink ballet shoes and brown ballet shoes are pretty much the same, which I think is really good.
Yeah. Like I feel like they should be the same because they're like the same thing. But yeah, I feel like that's just like a lot of things. That's just a lot of stuff that people just don't really think about, especially someone who's like not in like the ballet or like dancing industry. But okay, so just to finish off, do you have any other ideas for how tech can improve representation in and out of your respective industry? So either being like ballet or wherever you want to go to after college.
I actually think that I feel like AI is a big conversation right now because it's definitely increasing, especially the past like couple months. But I think that we could actually use AI to do a lot of really great things. And also just I think a big part of maybe in terms of the art, in terms of diversity and stuff, is a lot of marketing and like video creation and things like that. Because also watching a professional ballet show is really expensive. And so I feel like if you can use like video production to kind of highlight different dancers of diversity and things like that, so that younger dancers can watch that and learn and be inspired, that would be really great.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I think that's definitely a possibility too with like the emergence of AI in these past couple years. Okay, that's a good place to stop. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. Is there anything else you want to say?
No, thanks for having me.
Of course. Yeah, so just a quick reflection of the podcast that I hosted with Ru a little bit earlier. I think she touched on a lot of aspects that I personally have never had to think about. First off, I'm not in like the ballet atmosphere. I don't dance. I've never really had to think that like, oh, like some dancers and some people aren't being equally represented in the media. But she brought that up, and I just remember going to elementary school with her and her talking about like Misty Copeland, who was a really well known dancer who was actually a person of color, and she broke through a lot of barriers that people instilled on her by being a person of color and dancing and showing people that it doesn't matter like what you look like, who you are, like everyone is equal. And I think for Rue, she was a really good inspiration, and just like some of the stuff that she mentioned, like how a lot of dance ballet gear was not like readily available for people with like darker skin tones up until like 10 or so years ago. Just like things like that. Like I don't really have to think about it, but like when she says it out loud, it makes me question like why isn't this stuff like readily accessible to everyone? And so I think she just brought up a really good point with that. I also think we touched on a little bit of talk of technology and how certain technology has actually made it possible to create gear like this, and how on technology, and she brought up talking about AI and how there's a future with that to maybe put out and blast more videos for kids, smaller, younger kids, to be able to see people like them in the media. I think in the future there's just so much room for exploration, as well as just like endless amounts of opportunity for tech and representation to be combined, and for us to actually use tech for good. So that was just the conclusion I had from the podcast. I just wanted to share out my thoughts, and I hope you enjoyed.